Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this discussion. It's our second roundtable in connection with our report, Sustainable Building Monitor, Redefining Value. And today we'll be focusing on the office and workplace perspective in terms of this. I'm Chris Peters, the Commercial Director of ISG's Fit Out business, and I've spent the vast majority of my career in this sector, watching workplace patterns gradually shift until they were given an even greater shift during the pandemic. With me today at one of our most prestigious projects, I have a stellar panel of experts, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves before we get into our topic, starting with Mark.
So I'm Mark Davies, Principal Director at TP Bennett.
Hello, my name's David Crew. I'm the Global Operations Director for Hogan Lovells International.
Hi, my name is Anna Foden. I'm Head of Sustainability for ISG's Fit Out, Retail and Data Centers businesses.
Hello, I'm Paula. I'm Development Manager for Revantage Real Estate.
And I'm Nick Jackson. I'm a Director at Arup, and I lead the commercial workplace team in the architecture group at Arup.
Thank you, everyone. So when it comes to choosing the right location and property, what factors are key to building confidence in your selection?
I'll take this one first. So our original piece of research in the Power of Place showed that there are increased revenues with high-quality workspaces. So to enhance that research, we thought that we would take a look at traditional valuation methods that are simply based on financial models and overlay an ESG framework. So trying to redefine value not only on finances, but also on environmental, societal, workforce, and innovation data points. And we've had some really interesting outcomes showing that there are a lot of really great untapped locations in the UK for locating our workspaces.
From a Hogan Lovells perspective, we have a war on talent at the moment. So whilst we're pretty set in terms of the locations that we operate in, we do have this sort of war on talent that is in the background all the time. And we're, the grads coming into our business are constantly looking at responsible business and how we operate. So, if we can use sustainable buildings as a lever to encourage people to join our firm, then we use it. It's a good weapon for us to use.
What factors do we need to consider in our property selection?
Actually, that's really interesting because that's something that, from our perspective, we are taking into account since the very early stages when we are thinking about buying an asset. Environmental, social, and governance factors, it's something that we really want to understand since the beginning, and we include that in our due diligences.
Yeah, we sit across two sides of this conversation because on the one hand, as a big consultancy business, we work for lots of developers, property owners and so on how they're looking at their assets. And we're seeing a lot of conversations now and work going on about the whole way they appraise the value of their assets holistically because they're looking at what the market's coming to ask them for. On the other hand, we have a lot of buildings we occupy ourselves, and we're seeing our own staff increasingly interested in what the experience of the workplace is, what the environmental story behind the workplace is, and particularly graduates coming in. That's an important part of how they assess, coming to work for Arup or coming to work for somebody else. I think it's just part of a much richer sort of set of decisions they make now.
And it's also, sorry.
Yeah, I just think that when we're helping our clients, especially looking for a new building, some of the factors that we're embedding in our questionnaires is net carbon zero, engaging with the wider community, the social factors in there, and also the environmental considerations. That is something that's fundamental within our decision-making process that we help our clients with.
And it's also something that tenants are requesting more and more, I think. All these engagement with, local communities, sustainable transportation infrastructures, all these kind of things. It's really a driver, so it's something that we cannot avoid. We have to listen to the market and to our tenants, and just look into that.
And I think what David was saying there, the staff are expecting that. Also, the well-being of the staff, inclusive design, are all fundamental parts of not just choosing a building, but developing a building as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, for an existing asset, for example, what are the things that you can do to improve it? So, for example, achieving BREEAM excellent or outstanding in an asset that was built maybe in the 70s. How can you do that? Can you install PV? Can you do something about all the HVAC system, LEDs, lighting, all that kind of things? That's something that you can do to improve your asset, and that brings value to it.
Maybe I could just pick up on that point that, lots of organisations like ourselves have commitments that are out in the public in terms of our sustainability credentials. So, we have to direct ourselves to assets now that achieve those objectives of our firm.
I'd like to go back to the community aspect because I think it's really important. ISG has a really strong drive now to create meaningful social value on our projects so that when we do hand over the project to clients, it's something that you can carry on. So everyone loves a bake sale. They're fantastic, but they don't have a real lasting impact. So we're doing a lot more work in the tender phase to really understand the data in our local communities and understand the needs of the local communities, making those relationships as early as possible so that we can form meaningful relationships throughout the life of construction and then hand those off to the client.
So is that starting to influence your sort of the way you're procuring, where you're looking to procure either subcontractors or even materials, starting to look much more locally?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's many projects now where we have to look locally for suppliers and materials. I mean, we've spoken internally about how we might use materials that we're stripping out of buildings.
Yep.
Not just as ISG, but as an industry, because it should be an industry focus. There's no point one contractor sort of leading off in a charge. If you take 10 to 20 of the top contractors in the industry with you, that could be a really positive piece, because a lot of materials are redundant from sort of things like Cat A strip outs or even relatively recent Cat B fit outs as well that could be reused, and you could service clients with those materials and stuff like that. I don't know what you think about that, Anna.
Yeah, it has to be an industry-wide effort. I think it's a big elephant in the room, especially in fit out. We do a lot of stripping out, and there's no need to send all of that material off to the skip anymore because it's perfectly reusable and it's really high quality. There are hurdles there, but we've overcome all of them. We've had really great pockets of excellence. So yeah, the materials reuse piece is a big driver for us right now at ISG.
Yeah, we're starting to see that in the base build sort of market. So actually the building next door to here, 2 and 3 Finsbury Square, they dismantled, the steel frame's been dismantled, taken away. It's going to be reused somewhere else. It'd be good to see that happening within the cladding market and so on. But you're absolutely right. You've got to come together as a group of contractors to create a critical mass. So there's actually a sort of warehouse or warehouses of material that we as designers can go to, and if you like, start collaging whatever this space is and so on. Yeah. It's going to be a very different process being a designer in the future.
Well, that's it. When you're writing specifications, you go and visit these areas and go, actually, there's 100 square metres of that, and that would suit this purpose. And suddenly, we're probably into the circular economy piece.
Absolutely. I think the critical mass piece is very important.
Yeah.
Are the days of landlords handing buildings over with Cat A finished?
It's a great question.
Good question.
Controversial.
It's a great question. I don't think they are yet. I was part of the group that wrote the current sort of fit-out guidelines process, and Cat A is still in it. And we flagged it and said, should this still be in here, because it's clearly not a good use of materials, money, time, all of that thing. But I've yet to see a group of developers, and it is developers in this space really, that have gone, you know what, we're not going to do Cat A anymore. I haven't seen that drive as of yet.
That'd be a really brave decision, but I think maybe within 20 years it would be gone.
Yeah, it's got to be more than 20 years,
Yeah.
less than 20 years. It's just a colossal waste of tenants coming in, ripping it all out, starting again.
Yeah,
well, it's a change of mindset. So
change of mindset, and especially, but we are seeing a lot of projects that we're doing at TP Bennett where we're encouraging the clients just take it shilling core.
Yeah.
It just makes complete sense. I don't think I've personally worked on a full Cat A now for quite a while, so hopefully it might be done within 10 years.
You might have one floor that's Cat A, but the rest of it
that's what I've seen, is you do one floor maybe as an example. I mean, a lot goes hand depends very much. Most developments have a degree of pre-let,
Yeah.
embedded in. So half a building's pre-let or something when you start, and so that automatically is shell and core.
We're finding that we're also working on recycling buildings. A good example is the BT building behind St Paul's. Yeah. We're working with KPF. We work with Hopkins on 100 Liverpool Street, just out here, which is really exciting as well, being able to reuse the superstructure and various building elements.
As a client, do you think about that when you're looking at space that you're going to sign a lease for? Do you think about that Cat A piece? Do you go, actually, if you leave this shell and core, that affects my decision-making process?
I think from an occupier standpoint, it's got to do with critical mass and timing. If you're taking a large chunk of a building, then you probably, you're looking 18 months to 3 years in advance. So you've got time to take on that responsibility. If you're looking for 15, 20,000 square feet, you'd more than likely need it sooner rather than later. And so you'll take something that's got the Cat A in.
Yeah, makes sense. So we've talked about the different factors that are now involved in how we select property. I mean, a two-pronged question, I guess. What data do we need to collect to help us assess those factors? And if we are doing that, is there a new hierarchy to how we look at our property? Is it attracting people? Is it sustainability? Is it profitability? Is there a new hierarchy to how we look at property?
Maybe I should pick that one as an occupier. I think the landscape's changing all the time, and so the way I see it is that you almost have to aspire for the best now, because within 2 or 3 years that's going to be out of date. And so, looking at buildings, yes, you need to look at BREEAM, LEED, WELL. WELL is becoming more and more important from an occupier perspective. And I met someone the other day who said, I can literally tell a building when I'm walking through it, whether it's WELL certified or not. There are material changes to the way buildings operate. I also think, going back to my point about commitments that we've made and progression in terms of our energy use, managing our buildings as efficiently as possible, we need all the sensors and technology that you can possibly get to enable us to manage it to the most efficient way. So we need to aspire to the best the moment you start to look.
So buildings are very physical things. They're in place for a long time, but then technology moves forward at a much faster pace. So how do we align those two things?
I think we're already starting to see some technology that can help us keep up. I think an interesting development is products as a service. We're seeing it in lighting, in some kits for lighting, for example. I know the UK GBC is starting to do a bit of research in this space. So I'm not saying it's the panacea and it's going to fix everything, but I think we will see more products as a service, because you're right, technology moves on very quickly and becomes outdated very quickly.
I think you will, we're increasingly sort of trying to work with an idea that sort of loose fit is an important concept when you're designing a building, that you try not to make a building too bespoke and you try not to put too much hard fixed pieces in. In our own space, just at the scale of an office, we really work hard at building as little fixed sort of structure as we could, and doing a lot more with furniture solutions and sort of clever layouts of pieces so it can just adapt. And then moving stuff between our other buildings. We try and, we cycle furniture around between buildings. But the basic carcass of the building on the whole, if you make it too tight, too squeezed, it's very restrictive further down the line. Curiously, we've done quite a lot of work recently on a big building called 1 Triton Square on Regent's Place, originally designed as a trading building for one of the US banks back in the sort of mid-90s, late 90s. Never actually got used as a trading building. We've just refitted it. We've added 80% more net floor area to it. And we were able to do that because actually the building was quite over-specified in the first place and actually just had a looseness and generosity to it that it could take a real intensification. And actually that means it'll be there for 50, 60 years, not 25. That's a really interesting area. I mean, we've just moved into new space on 80 Charlotte Street, which you guys fitted out. And we've put air quality sensors in, we've got noise sensors in to pick up acoustic levels, we've got people counters in every meeting room, we've got people counters in the open plan space. I mean, we're slightly at the point we're getting so much data out, we're trying to work out how to filter it and digest it. But we've sort of got a live model of the way the space is being used that we can verify, and then we can monitor that against what's going on with the MEP systems. We can look at it about just actually how are people using space, how are they using bits of furniture, how are they moving around the space, and it's just giving us a real insight into actually the reality of what happens versus what we might speculate or model when we're working as designers. And we've seen a lot of interest from clients who are going, okay, not all of it, but they're looking at certain parts of that are going, okay, air quality, really important thing to have through a space and understand how the space is performing from a well-being point of view. People counters is really interesting for big organizations who've got big space to see actually how their buildings sort of operate in reality.
Are you looking at doing more sort of like blurring the lines between private and public, engaging with the community of your buildings?
Well, I think that's happening in all sorts of ways. I think the vanilla office building, if you like, that just is a sort of single entity is rapidly becoming a sort of a rare thing. I mean, certain HQ buildings need to be that, but a lot more buildings have got a lot more mix of uses going on within them. And, you know, I think as they get curated in a different way. So, yeah, we have a lot more public coming in. We have a lot more events going on. Ground floor of our buildings sort of intentionally set up to sort of encourage that interaction.
We're finding more activation on the ground floor now. And so going away from what you're talking about, basically the tin cans, so lifting that, having more engagement with the public realm, but also that security line is being pulled back, in some cases, right into the heart of the building. So it does feel that when you're walking into that ground floor, that you feel part of the building, you can engage with that building. And certainly within our office, we're looking at, we open up our office to schools. And I noticed actually here, there were school children walking through, which is brilliant when you think on a Friday when a lot of people are working from home. Suddenly you've got these buildings consuming a lot of energy, and then you're having another use. And I think it's really important that we're reaching out to the local community, reaching out to schools, and there's that great blurring of lines. No longer you come to the city and you just got these boxes and tin cans. Now they feel they're just starting to blend a little bit more with the local community.
I see that in the consultancy framework where, you know, traditionally it's probably drawn people from sort of certain part of society and so on. It's really important we start to broaden that and take on a much more inclusive approach to how we bring people into our industry and help them at the school level, like you're doing this morning with people coming in this building. You know, so critical we give them the opportunity that at an early stage they realise there is a place for them in our industry in all sorts of different positions and roles and so on, and that they can see a sort of a path to get to that.
With new builds coming on now, a lot of this is part of the Section 106 agreements as well. So we'll start to see that filter through as the new buildings come online.
I'd like to go back to the, I'd like to go back to how people use the building. I think it's a really important point. I think we'd be surprised by how many, or I'm very surprised by how many clients that we work with that when you ask them, well, how do you use your space? How do you use your current space? They genuinely don't really know. So there's such a big data gap that could have informed the design process for them. So I think the smart building technology that we're seeing at 80 Charlotte Street is going to be massively helpful in the future of retrofits, because clients will know how their space is being used. Their retrofit in the future will be much more informed, much more energy efficient, and just efficient all around.
We're installing the tech now to inform the future piece, really.
The key thing here is how you use that data. We have a lot of data right now, a lot of technology, everything is evolving, but how are we going to use that? How can we make the most of that data? And also, if you have that data, you can use it to compare, for example, with last year. How have you improved? Where are the areas that you can enhance, that you can usability of the buildings we were talking about?
Well, we started during COVID. We started building a piece of software that draws on our. We have software we use for modelling people movement in big transport infrastructure, so stations and airports and so called Mass Motion. And we started applying that to floor plate layouts to test sort of where the hotspots were with sort of, social distancing. And we built this thing called Space Explorer, which was sort of, you took a desk layout, you mapped how people were moving to T-points, lifts and so on, and you started to see these hotspots. And then you said, okay, what do we change in the short term to sort of alleviate that and sort of fiddle with the circulation? We're now sort of using that to go, okay, we can use that to model actually how people, might use a floor plate in non-COVID terms, in normal usage. And the data we're using to correlate against that piece of software to tune it and go, okay, this is what the software is telling us and giving us as a sort of result. From the data, we can see that's accurate or not, or we can adjust it. And we're using that, working with sort of some large occupiers to go, okay, when you've got big floor plates, how do you adjust the way they're using? You're not using these pieces of furniture and so on. So.
And what would be great for the industry is to share that data, so you can use that outcomes, for early stages, for design of buildings. How do you want it to, to be?
I mean, I think what we've seen over the last few years is most of the clients we work with, they look at the standards and they go, okay, that's a starting point, but the way we use workplaces is much more agile than that. So, the conversations around density and so on are very fluid, I think, now. What we are trying to do is build a sort of body of evidence that then we can take to organisations like yours and go, okay, that might be how you saw the standards. This is what we're seeing in application. How do you begin to vary what you're doing and testing that? It's early days in a way, but the data we're getting about how people occupy collaboration zones versus desk zones, what that does at different times of day, simple data, just, how many people overbook a meeting room or underbook a meeting room. 4 people book a meeting room that takes 10, and vice versa, 10 book a meeting room that takes 4. We're just sort of correlating that and looking at those patterns of behavior and then trying to take that back out to clients and go, these are the lessons we're learning from our building. Some of this might be relevant to yours. It's more evident, it's evidencing the design decision or standards sort of application, if you like.
As an occupier who does have kind of workplace guidelines, it's a living document. We're constantly updating because every project is a new learning. And, we take on a professional body of consultants to support us. If we weren't listening to that, then, shame on us. But, this is a living document and we constantly are updating it with recent trends and learnings from our most recent projects.
Yeah, one of the things we've been finding is, there's no such thing as a vanilla workforce, if you like. Every organisation has different sorts of personas, people who have certain patterns of work, how they work. Some are very technical. They need to sit at a desk with a couple of monitors. Others they're moving around the workplace all the time having conversations. They're leading teams. That's what they do. And so, in a way, we're starting to realise you get sort of characterisations even within one organisation of people who have certain roles and behave in certain ways in terms of they're very desk located, or they're really always sitting at a table just chatting to their colleagues, or they actually never need a desk because they're never there. They put their bag down there in the morning and then they're in and out of meeting rooms and they're out of the office and so on. And we're using it in a way also to try and characterise what the profile of organisations is. And that's quite sensitive because people don't like being profiled, quite understandably, but you find there are sort of behaviour patterns coming out.
I mean, my assumption would be it would be very different sector by sector, potentially. I don't know. From a legal point of view, banking point of view, the different sectors would probably throw up different data from that sort of collection point, I would assume.
The interesting thing, it doesn't matter what sector you look at, it's all about collaboration, getting people together.
Exactly.
So, using that data to actually understand, for example, during COVID, you were looking at trying to eliminate the hotspots, get people away. Now, actually, you want to do the opposite. You want to get them together. You want to bang into each other and share ideas. Yeah.
Makes sense.
I mean, it comes back to basically the most sustainable building is a really busy building, an occupied building, you know, with the systems adjusted to run to suit that, really.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah, I guess which leads on to the sort of last point we were going to discuss. We talked about data collection, sustainability, and Anna, I think you mentioned it, the retrofit piece, that this is going to become more and more prevalent and is already quite high up on the agenda. I mean, how do we as an industry, public, private sector, drive that forward? And if there is resistance to that, how do we make sure it's embedded with how we're all thinking, whether that's client, consultant, contractor?
That's a great question. I think there's a key data point out there that the UK GBC likes to spout. 80% of our building stock in 2050 already exists. I think that's the data point. And so there is a huge drive, I think, already for retrofitting, especially now we've got some of the MEES legislation with the EPCB by 2030. I think that's really driving a lot of developers to take action. I think there's probably a completely separate debate about whether EPCs are fit for purpose, but there you have it. That's what's out in the industry right now, and I think we are seeing a huge drive to retrofit, to upgrade, to make sure that we don't have stranded assets. In addition to getting people back into our offices, you have things like the legal field where, it's essentially you essentially get an apprenticeship when you're a young lawyer, right? You need to be around and seeing the people doing the work to make sure that you're advancing in your career and getting the education that you need to move forward. So, I think the drivers are already there. And I think we're going to see a huge push for it in the next few years for retrofitting.
I think the whole life carbon assessment of any building project now is the sort of, the golden thread, if you like, that runs through. So it's not just the operational carbon, which is what all the measures, BREEAM and so on look at. Neighbours is better because it looks at the operational side. It isn't just looking at the base build story, but the whole life carbon story that looks for the whole sort of cycle of a building, increasingly comes back to, well, you've got to look at your existing asset and say, can I reuse it first before I go through other steps?
I mean, with developer, end user, consultants, when you speak to clients, is that on top of their agenda? Is that in their decision-making process? Are they going, right, well, what's the whole life carbon piece here?
It's a conversation they are really aware of now, and they're engaged with, and they're engaged at portfolio levels, or going to talk to Imperial or the big educational institutions. They're very aware of what their wider ownership means and so on.
Yeah.
In our case, that's one of our goals in short term, not only long term, because it's very easy to say I want to reduce the embodied carbon, the carbon footprint in 30 years or 10 years. But what are you going to do in the next 1 to 3 years? So what is your goal? And we are doing things to get there. So I think it's also about setting the right and real goals and something specific rather than saying we want to do this, but you don't get to the ground.
It's an important question, and we've got to be doing it. We've got to be upskilling, not just as consultants, our designers and architects. At TP Bennett, we have an AdLib library that basically captures information regarding carbon footprint, well-being of the people making those materials, and some of the composition of those materials. And we give it an amber, green, red traffic light system. So that helps our designers then choose those materials, and we sit down with our clients and we take them through that particular journey. So, and I think also we've got to extend that to building managers as well, that they actually measure the carbon output of the buildings that initially was intended for a particular use. So education, I think, is really important, and training is key.
It's key, yeah. And for the new generations, I think that's easy because in universities, schools, it's like in their DNA, let's say. But for currently at this moment, the people that are leading this change, they need to have that change in mindsets in their heads, and give importance to this kind of thing. So I think it's key to hire the right people and the right team So, for example, having a director of ESG in every single company, I think that would be a real benefit to the market.
And going back to gaining the right skills, I mentioned that we're at ISG having a big drive to create meaningful social value. That is a key thing we're picking up on. Is when we go into the communities that we do see a lot of gaps in a local council's ability to upskill children in a certain topic, or gaps where there are certain areas of a borough that are just a bit untouched. So we are using data to make sure that we're trying to tap into a new source for the next generation of our industry that would not necessarily be tapped into. And we're seeing a lot of talent come out of people from backgrounds that we would, I'd say maybe 10 years ago, not engage with. And it's a really important piece of what we're doing right now to make sure that our industry and ISG is just much more diverse than it is.
How are you doing that? Who's spearheading that within your organisation?
Yes,
is there a dedicated...
Yes, we've got a dedicated group head of social value.
Yeah.
And she's got between 20 and 30 specific social value managers and senior managers that sit under her. We also have a separate head of diversity, inclusion, and equality and well-being. So we have both of those roles running concurrently with a real focus on that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say, because we've actually rebranded HR now as People and Culture. So that sweeps up all the things that you're talking about. And then with that is the interest that comes with that, with reaching out to the local community and tapping into that talent that otherwise we've forgotten about.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important now. For all of us as businesses.
So once again, thanks for joining us. If you want to continue these conversations, there'll be links when this is sent out. And I'd like to thank our panel for joining us today for what has been a really good debate. Thanks again.